August 1944. In northern France, battered towns echoed with the rumbles of tanks and the distant motors of an advancing army. But far from the front lines, Allied commanders faced their greatest enemy yet, not German guns, but the relentless math of distance, exhaustion, and supply. It had become clear. The Allied armies charging east from Normandy could move only as fast as their fuel, bullets, and rations allowed. The Wehrmacht, retreating but not broken, bet everything that the advancing Americans would soon outrun their own logistics. The same fate that had doomed armies from Napoleon to Stalingrad. Night fell across the ruined roads of France. In a chateau-turned headquarters, Colonel Laurent Ayers and his officers pored over maps stacked with impossible numbers. Patton's Third Army, blazing a trail toward the Seine, needed 12,000 tons of fuel, ammunition, and food daily, every single day. It wasn't just a matter of trucks, but of roads ripped apart by retreating Germans, bridges blown to rubble, and countless desperate miles. A voice cut through the gloom. We need more than courage to win. We need a miracle of motion. The answer is logistics, and it's about to shape the fate of this war as surely as any general or tank. As the Allies thundered forward, betting on speed and daring, supply depots struggled to keep up. Lines of trucks snaked along cratered highways, headlights burning through the night, drivers praying they'd arrive before the fighting moved on without them. For German commanders, the equation was simple. Slow the logistical lifeblood of the Americans, and the guns at the front would fall silent by themselves. But Patton refused to slow down. The Third Army's advance, measured in miles per day, stunned friend and foe alike. Yet behind every victory was the same nagging dread. What happens when the gas runs out? When endless columns of armor reach the end of what the supply officer can conjure? Thus began the greatest supply gamble in the history of modern war. The Allies saw the truth. This campaign would not be won by another cavalry charge or by tanks alone. It would be decided by an army of truckers, mechanics, and logisticians moving in a frantic ballet of steel and sweat. No one in 1944 yet realized that America was about to unleash a weapon the Germans had never truly feared. The organized chaos of industrial logistics, delivered at a scale the world had never seen. From that midnight meeting, a plan began to take shape. The Red Ball Express, an idea as ruthless and American as the big engines that roared in from the coast. A supply line that would stretch the notion of what was possible and bend the will of an entire nation toward a single goal. Keep Patton and the Allies moving east, no matter what. The day after that midnight decision, the Seventh Army sky brightened with engine smoke and rising anticipation. Convoys of GMC deuce-and-a-half trucks gathered at the coast, 5,958 vehicles, painted olive drab, standing ready for the most ambitious supply chain Europe had ever seen. America's secret weapons that August were not just tanks or fighter planes, but drivers, 23,000 men, many of them young, most barely out of high school. The majority were African-American soldiers, drafted into a segregated army, now called to deliver the supplies that would fuel the liberation of a continent. There was no time for ceremony. The order came down. Make the impossible possible. Run supplies round the clock, no blackout, headlights on, move or die. Nothing like it had ever been attempted. Military convention dictated camouflage at night and endless stops at dusk. The Red Ball broke every rule. Instead, these trucks blazed down dedicated one-way highways, one lane going east, the other returning west, bordered by painted red circles marking the route. Every truck was packed full. Bullets, fuel, rations, medical supplies stacked to the roof. Drivers raced 20 hours out of every 24, fighting not just fatigue, but a storm of logistical nightmares. They faced bombed-out bridges, cratered roads, snipers, breakdowns, and exhaustion so deep it pressed heavy on the soul. The convoy soon stretched for miles, an endless metallic river weaving across France. Lights shone out through shattered villages. The sound of American engines became a new kind of thunder, a testament to raw industrial will. At the wheel, men swapped stories and sang, coaxing battered trucks one more mile. Maintenance teams set up mobile repair stations every 50 miles. Mechanics worked miracles roadside, swapping out engines or cannibalizing broken-down vehicles to keep 5,000 trucks rolling as one living supply line. For the Germans, the sight was incomprehensible. A logistics operation so massive, so constant, that it mocked their very doctrine. German intelligence reports buzzed with rumors. Endless American convoys, headlights burning day and night. No discipline, just volume and speed. Meanwhile, the Allied leadership watched anxiously as every gallon of gas and ration of food became the thread pulling Europe closer to liberation. Failure meant not just a stalled army, but risking the entire campaign. Success demanded relentless drive, literally and figuratively. Townspeople watched as the Red Ball Express thundered past, often stopping only for fuel or quick repairs. The drivers, a blur of determination and dust, became the unsung heroes of the Allied advance. Each truck that completed its run was a victory in the quiet logistics war. A blow struck not with bullets, but with gasoline, grit, and indomitable will. This was the Red Ball's awakening, a revolution in motion, powered not just by engines, but by the hearts and hands of everyday Americans. With wheels set in motion, the Red Ball Express ran day and night, pumping new lifeblood into the Allied armies. But behind its legendary speed lurked a desperate, messy reality. A system built for urgency, surviving on little more than sweat, improvisation, and stubborn American willpower. Each day, convoys hurtled down one-way highways, military police waving them through blocked crossroads and battered bridges. The rules: do not stop. Breakdowns? Mechanics raced alongside convoys, fixing flats roadside or swapping engines in muddy fields. Jams? If a truck slowed for more than 5 minutes, it was simply pushed into a ditch. Mission always came first. Drivers learned to take 10-minute breaks just before the hour, eating sandwiches behind the wheel, catching sleep 2 and 3 hours at a time when they could. At night, headlights sliced through darkness, sometimes violating blackout discipline so fiercely that even German reconnaissance marveled at the risk. With Allied air now dominant and German Luftwaffe nearly broken, the biggest threat was not bombs but fatigue and the ravaged French countryside itself. The challenges pushed every system to its breaking point. Endless mud dragged wheels under. Autumn rains flooded rivers and fields, making shallow creeks almost impassable. Bridges blown in retreat forced rough bypasses and temporary structures to rise overnight, transforming engineers and truckers into combat pioneers. Muddy back roads and narrow village lanes throttled trucks, but the orders never changed. Keep moving. According to one Red Ball veteran, we became a rolling city, living by the clock and by the sound of engines, where supply, not strategy, dictated victory's pace. And still, the numbers astonished friend and foe. In just 5 days, nearly 6,000 Allied trucks delivered over 12,000 tons in a single day, a record that dwarfed all earlier efforts. The supply line stretched, the front lines advanced, and the impossible kept rolling east, mile by back-breaking mile. Behind every Allied victory in the fading summer of 1944 stood thousands of drivers, mechanics, and MPs, unsung soldiers whose sweat and grit, not medals or headlines, carved the path to Paris and beyond. The Red Ball Express, born in chaos, became the backbone of freedom's march. Within days, the Red Ball Express was roaring at full tilt. From the bustling port at Cherbourg to the heart of liberated France, thousands of trucks barreled down their own one-way highways, marked with red circles and guarded by tireless MPs. Every inch was a battlefield, not of bullets but of endurance, invention, and tension. Drivers, many young and desperately inexperienced, learned the art of survival through raw necessity. Routine breakdowns became daily tests of improvisation, stripping parts from dead trucks, coaxing wounded engines back to life, pushing the battered deuce-and-a-half through mud, rain, and blocked roads. On some nights, entire convoys moved at blackout, cat-eye headlights barely illuminating the ruined French countryside. Every driver knew the rules. Drive fast, risk a crash. Drive slow, risk discipline. Speeding trucks careened through villages and past audacious MPs trying to maintain order, police intersections, and keep civilian traffic off the sacred convoy routes. Accidents were common, the price paid for never stopping the flow. Crews swapped out flat tires and even entire engines roadside, determined to keep 'em rolling, because if they didn't, Patton's tanks would soon be silent. At the convoy support centers, refueling and maintenance never paused. Mechanics and signalmen worked in all weather to clear wrecks, fix bridges, and patch phone lines linking the entire route. Every 10 or 20 miles, makeshift aid stations waited for the wounded, a reminder that danger wasn't only at the front. When German aircraft occasionally strafed the convoys, drivers took shelter in ditches, then climbed back to their seats as soon as the danger passed. The convoy's greatest challenge was time. With every day Patton advanced, the supply lines grew longer. Fuel, every can precious, became the sole focus. 5-gallon jerry cans were stacked to the sky, loaded and offloaded by hand. Each truck carried not just supplies, but the hopes of the entire Allied advance. Delays threatened disaster. Success required pure stamina. This was logistics at full throttle, a living, breathing system built on grit, sacrifice, and relentless American adaptation. Behind every roaring engine and every tired set of hands, the Red Ball Express proved that it was chaos turned into creation. The supply chain wasn't just a lifeline. It was the true engine of victory on the roads of France. Day by day, the Red Ball Express became a living legend, restless, relentless, and always at risk of collapse. The road was a gauntlet of broken bridges patched with splintered timbers, mud clogged by autumn rain, lined with the debris of war, and shadowed by the worry of ambush. The danger wasn't just from the distant enemy. It was from the exhaustion that stalked every driver and mechanic as the weeks ground on. More than 6,000 trucks ran at any hour, forcing their way forward on highways marked only for them, with painted red circles leading from the Normandy coast to the front line. At its peak, nearly 900 trucks rumbled forward every day, each loaded with fuel, ammunition, spare parts, or rations. The system grew and adapted in real time. Semi-trailers were swapped in for speed, convoys rerouted around bottlenecks, and bypasses bulldozed right through fields when bridges blew. As the columns moved, America's mechanization advantage grew clear. The trucks and the men who drove and fixed them were the single most vital element keeping the Allied spearhead alive in France. As one officer remembered, it didn't matter how fast your tanks were unless someone kept the gas coming. Conditions were grueling. Drivers, most of them young black soldiers, went days with little sleep, hands blistered and minds dulled by the endless pounding of rough roads. Discipline was harsh. There was no room for mistakes along a convoy that stretched to the horizon. Many men went without proper mess halls, hot food, or even basic shelter, improvising where needed just to get one more run done. Mechanical failure was constant and expected. Mechanics became heroes in their own right. Engines were swapped on roadside jacks, transmissions fixed under pouring rain, and tires replaced by the dozens every day. Trucks cannibalized for parts stood as silent sacrifices beside the route. Teams performed miracles. Engines changed in 45 minutes, repairs finishing before the convoy could snarl. Perhaps most astonishing, the Red Ball Express and the African-American soldiers who made it run showed how determination could rewrite the rules of not just war, but of a country's own prejudices. Despite segregation, discrimination, and the weight of a nation's bias, these drivers proved their courage and skill with every successful trip. Their heroism would leave a mark not just on logistical doctrine, but on American civil rights history. Along the way, the Red Ball Express became a spectacle, an unbroken formation of headlights, a symbol of Allied victory, and the irreversible shift in how wars would be fought henceforth. It wasn't just a supply line. It was industrial democracy in motion, a force that demoralized the enemy and sustained the hope of liberated France at every mile. 8 weeks after it began, with Antwerp's port finally secured and French rail lines mended, the Red Ball Express had delivered over 400,000 tons of supplies, a miracle of improvisation, industrial power, and sheer will. Allies would go on to name follow-up routes: the Little, Red Ball, the Red Lion, and the XYZ Express, after the system that changed everything. Yet none would ever capture the raw drama that carried Patton's Third Army and all of Western Europe from defeat to deliverance. As the Red Ball Express thundered through France, its daily grind became a test of human spirit as much as mechanical endurance. Every 48-hour run meant wresting battered trucks past bomb craters and over bridges rebuilt overnight. Roadside mechanics became legends, inventing quick fixes with whatever tools and scrap could be found, keeping the engine of Allied victory alive mile by mile. Fatigue haunted every mile. Drivers, many just out of their teens, gulped black coffee and swallowed adrenaline pills to stave off sleep. Some would push themselves for 70 hours straight, haunted by visions of home, of Paris, of the hope that every run brought the war's end closer. Accidents were common. Trucks collided or slid into ditches. Burned-out hulks lined the route, a grotesque reminder that the Red Ball's victory did not come without cost. Enemy action only added to the chaos. German planes sometimes strafed the convoys, but far greater dangers lurked in fog, rain, and exhaustion. Near the front, snipers took potshots at drivers who never wavered, pressing on through the nights. General Patton himself visited the route, shaking oil-streaked hands, reminding the men, "Without you, our blitz stops cold." Morale, somehow, rarely broke. Camaraderie bonded Black, white, and Latino drivers as equals in hardship. Paint and chalk adorned trucks. Patton's blood bank, Hitler, "Here we come," and "Keep 'em rolling." The very segregation that marked American society was undone by the reality of the road. No one cared who sat beside them when enemy fire cracked or an axle snapped in the dead of night. At its peak, the Red Ball Express put nearly 1,000 trucks on the road every day. Each driver knew he was a crucial link in a chain pulling America's armies eastward. Newspapers reported on their heroics, and at home, families waited for word of sons and brothers fueling the Allied advance 1 5-ton load at a time. By November 1944, the job was done. Ports like Antwerp opened, rail lines were restored, and the mechanical miracle moved east with the armies it sustained. Yet for those who kept the red ball rolling, its story would live on. Proof that grit and ingenuity can win wars, and that victory depends as much on the courage of the supply line as the bravery of the men at the front. As autumn 1944 faded into winter, the Red Ball Express began to wind down, its thunderous convoys giving way to the whistle of restored railways and the hum of barges now moving supplies from liberated ports like Antwerp. For 82 days, the Express had poured an unbroken supply line across France. More than 6,000 trucks, nearly 500,000 tons of gasoline, food, and ammunition hauled to keep the Allied armies on the move. Over 121 million ton-miles in 3 months. In the quiet after the engines, the true scale of the operation came into focus. Never before had such a complex motorized convoy system been sustained in a combat theater for so long. And it had done more than deliver supplies. It had carried hope, speed, and the certainty of Allied resolve, shattering not only German defenses, but also the technical limits of military logistics. The Red Ball's lessons echoed far beyond the roads of northern France. General Patton himself acknowledged the drivers and mechanics as vital to his army's victories. The men behind the scenes whose sweat and grit determined the pace of liberation. Their makeshift tactics, breakneck repairs, and command flexibility would become a model for truck-based logistics in conflicts to come, forcing planners worldwide to rethink what rapid, improvisational supply could achieve. But the greatest testament of the Express was the legacy carried by its drivers, especially the African-American soldiers who, even while facing segregation at home and in uniform, had outperformed expectations daily by risking their lives to sustain the front lines. Through endless nights, mechanical breakdowns, and near constant threat from enemy air and fatigue, they proved that logistics could be as heroic, history-changing, and demanding as anything on the front lines. By November 16th, as the Red Ball Express officially ceased operations, the landscape and the men themselves had been transformed. New express routes, like the White Ball, ABC, Red Lion, XYZ, would build on its example as the Allies pressed on into Germany. In the decades that followed, the lessons of the Red Ball Express would ripple through militaries and transport industries around the world, and the men who'd kept the wheels turning would remain part of the unsung backbone of victory. As autumn darkened the French countryside in late 1944, the Red Ball Express thundered forward, engines echoing down muddy roads. But just as the campaign and supply effort reached their peak, the world was shifting. Ports like Antwerp opened, and rail lines were repaired, ushering in a new era and hinting at the eventual end of the frantic truck convoys. Despite impossible odds, for 82 relentless days, the Red Ball convoys had kept Patton and Allied divisions in motion, delivering more than 412,000 tons of supplies, fuel, food, and ammunition to the front. On any given day, hundreds of trucks, driven mostly by young, untested men, rolled out under blackout, winding their way toward the ever-evolving edge of the Allied advance. Racing through fog, darkness, and chaos, drivers rarely saw the same stretch of road twice. Many of those pressed into service with the Red Ball Express had started the war as laborers, porters, or rookie drivers. After weeks on the road, they learned to master their vehicles and themselves. They created an unspoken brotherhood of men who risked exhaustion and enemy attack, who learned to fix broken axles by flashlight, to keep convoys moving through mud and mortar fire, to swap tips on sleep and survival. their courage and improvisation spread by word of mouth. "Keep 'em rolling" became the unofficial creed of every logistics man in France. The Red Ball's success inspired more. As the fighting moved east, new convoy systems emerged: White Ball, Red Lion, ABC, X, Y, Z, all pulling crucial lessons from that first wild surge in France. These later operations built on the Red Ball's template: flexible planning, priority routes, relentless shift discipline, on-the-fly engineering, convoy control points, and, above all else, the lesson that speed, and not just caution, could win wars. Military planners openly praised the young truckers and their officers for inventing a new logistics doctrine under fire, rewriting manuals with sweat on the ground. But the real legacy remained in the hearts of the men who'd driven the Red Ball. Many returned home after the war changed, some founding or leading trucking and transport companies, teaching their sons and daughters that sometimes the path to greatness runs through mud, not medals. For the U.S. Army and the world's militaries, the fevered months of the Red Ball Express became a lesson. Modern war is won by men who can solve the last mile, whatever it takes, wherever it leads. This was the route that changed the art of war, not with bullets or bombs, but with wheels and willpower, roaring always toward victory and history. Autumn 1944. The Red Ball Express thundered day and night, its endless freight bringing the Allied armies to the threshold of Germany. As the port of Antwerp finally opened and French rail lines limped back to life, the greatest truck convoy in history began winding down, but not before it had rewritten every known rule of military logistics. By November's end, the statistics shocked even the most hardened supply officers. In just 82 days, drivers had delivered over 412,000 tons of fuel, ammunition, and supplies to the front lines. Enough to keep Patton's tanks rolling, Hodge's infantry marching, and the dream of Allied victory alive. At the peak, 1 out of every 4 trucks in France belonged to the Red Ball. Nightly, columns bristling with headlights traversed the battered highways, casting a moving constellation across the continent. But for the Americans, it was more than numbers. It was the courage of black and white soldiers, working in segregated teams yet united by mission, who braved fatigue, breakdown, and the constant threat of German attack. Some men died behind the wheel: collisions, air raids, exhaustion. Others performed daily miracles, swapping engines curbside, coaxing battered vehicles home, sharing chocolate and rations with French children who lined every bend. The Red Ball operation had grown into legend, its story carried by word of mouth from Paris cafes to London command posts. It would inspire similar convoys: the Little Red Ball, the XYZ route, driving deeper into liberated France and, eventually, into Germany. The lessons were clear. Speed and redundancy outpaced careful planning. Courage was as vital as gasoline. German officers, captured and interrogated, admitted their defeat owed as much to the supply trucks as to the GIs and tanks. The sound of American motors, the unending drumbeat, became a weapon of its own. Rumors circulated among German ranks: "Endless trucks mean endless war for us." Back home in America, newspapers barely celebrated the triumph. But the men of the Red Ball finished their run, knowing they'd changed the outcome of a global catastrophe by refusing to let anything, weather, breakdown, enemy, prejudice, stop the convoy's progress. For every exhausted driver, every mechanic with grease-blackened hands, every officer who mapped the route, the Red Ball Express proved something eternal: that ingenuity, unity, and determination can pave the highway to victory, 1 mile at a time. The war would soon end, but its outcome was forged not just in the fury of combat, but in the quiet heroism of men who kept the wheels rolling, until final triumph was written in their tire tracks. When the Red Ball Express shut down in November 1944, its impact echoed far beyond the battered highways of France. In less than 3 months, 5,958 trucks had delivered over 412,000 tons of desperately needed supplies, keeping 28 Allied divisions in constant motion across a continent ravaged by war. The Express was powered by the devotion, skill, and endurance of mostly African-American soldiers, who faced not only enemy fire, but the daily challenges of a segregated army. They drove for days with little rest, tackling exhaustion, breakdowns, and enemy air raids, fueled by pride in their mission and faith in the cause. Despite the obstacles, the Red Ball Express demonstrated what was possible when the raw logistics of industry connected with the determination of ordinary citizens. General Patton's quick advances across France became possible only because the Red Ball never stopped rolling. The system was so successful that it spawned offshoots like the White Ball and XYZ Express, proving that a network of highways and rivers of trucks could liberate an entire continent. Yet the legacy of the Express went deeper. It changed the philosophy of American supply forever, showing the world that military genius can matter less than relentless industrial innovation and the will of frontline workers. Black drivers and mechanics proved that, given a chance, their contributions could reshape the tide of history. In post-war America, many Red Ball veterans founded trucking companies, revolutionized logistics, and fought for civil rights with the same resolve they showed hauling ammunition through darkness. The lesson of the Red Ball Express endures. Logistics is victory. Movement is survival. History remembered the tanks, the maps, and the generals. But behind every decisive battle was a convoy burning fuel against time, a living river of steel, grit, and hope. That memory is the real monument, not just to the Allied cause, but to those who drove the distance, made the impossible ordinary, and delivered freedom at 40 miles an hour on the open road.